I was very pleased to receive Dr. Cho's invitation to share with you some of my observations on the recently concluded meeting of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. My comments should, of course, be considered in the context of the continuing proposal for a more focused development bank along the lines that the forum has been considering and has proposed for some years in the recent past. As most of you already know, the second annual meeting of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, that's the AIIB, was held in Korea on 16 to 18th July 2017. The bank's management reports significant progress in meeting the bank's goals and objectives. Much of this progress has been of a procedural nature and not really substantive. Among the accomplishments that have been cited were the following. First, the bank's governors approved membership for 13 additional countries, bringing the total membership to 80, which compares to the number of 50 that were members on 31 December 2016. Secondly, the subscriptions to the bank's capital on 31 December 2016 totaled $90 billion, of which only $18 billion was paid in and $72 billion was callable. Approximately 2/3 of the bank's paid-in capital was paid in the form of non-convertible national currencies. China remains the bank's largest shareholder, with about 25 or 26% of the bank's capital shares. The AIIB reports 16 loans in process, mostly involving co-financing with the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, or other multinational lending institutions. Interestingly enough, a special projects preparation fund was established with a $30 million grant from China to facilitate the preparation of projects from lower and middle income countries, which indicates that these projects are not coming in as quickly and as readily as the organizers of the bank thought they would be. Also, it's significant that the bank announced its support for the agreement on the climate change, and even more significant is the fact that the bank supports China's One Road, One Belt initiative, which is called the OBOR. While noting the achievements that have been reported, I would like to address several issues that still remain open, and they may prevent the bank from ever achieving the status of the World Bank or the regional Asian Development Bank or the other regional banks. And they point to, the issues that I'm raising point to some long-term problems which make it important that we continue to promote and flesh out the proposal for a more focused, more limited Northeast Asian Development Bank of the sort we have discussed in the past. I would like in particular to comment on two of the outstanding issues. As will become clear later in my presentation, they may in fact be parts of the same larger issue that will affect the bank's future conduct. The first issue involves how the bank will secure funds for future operations. The second issue involves the possibility of a takeover of the AIIB's projects by a more global initiative that is sponsored by the Chinese government. The first issue is the securing of funds for future AIIB operations. As most of you know, the World Bank, as well as the Asian Development Bank and the regional banks, obtain most of their funds from the capital markets of the world. They do so through the sale of bonds in these markets, and these are capital exporting countries, so they do have surplus savings in which to invest in the bonds of the World Bank or the AIIB. They are typically the capital exporting capitals of New York City or London or Tokyo. The countries in which these markets are located are typically members of the bank, so that in fact, when the banks borrow from the markets, they're backed by the full faith and credit of the country in which the market is located. The proceeds of the bank's sales of bonds are then used for on-lending to member countries to pay for the goods and services provided by suppliers of the projects. The terms and conditions of the on-lending is generally more favorable than the country itself could find in the market. So that's why the intermediation of the development banks is so useful to them. The World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and the regional banks have used this borrowing and on-lending technique as the principal means of securing funds for their disbursements for a very long time. The countries whose markets they have tapped for this purpose are Great Britain, Germany, the United States, and Japan, as well as some other European nations. All but the last two countries, that is the United States and Japan, are members of the AIIB. So even without the US and without Japan, the capital markets of the bank's current members could provide virtually all of the financing that the bank will need in the foreseeable future. But these borrowing arrangements have not been discussed and have not been established with the member countries. So a very real possibility for securing funds for AIIB's operations in the future has simply been left on the sidelines. Now, I reviewed the AIIB's organizational documents, in particular its financial policies and strategies, and its bylaws. And I've turned up just one reference in Article 16 to the fact that the AIIB can raise funds, and I'm quoting, through borrowing in member countries or elsewhere, unquote. This authorization should be sufficient to trigger arrangements for the provision to be activated now and soon, if not immediately. That is, the Article 16 is a authorization which the bank needs and has apparently not taken advantage of. Why this borrowing for on-lending approach has not become, as it has for the World Bank and other banks, the first line of offense for the AIIB is a mystery. Why has it been such an important approach for the other banks, but there's no mention of it at all as far as the AIIB is concerned? This is a puzzling development. It's a very simple process, in fact, because all it requires is the bank to make known its wish to borrow in the capital markets, and most of the work is done by the managers of the issue. So the managers would, for example, set the interest rates, would set the terms, would set the amounts, and would basically handle the sale of the bonds in the capital markets. Very little staff work would be required, and very few staff would be required of the AIIB to do this kind of work, but yet it has not been done. So one wonders if there are other reasons that the bank has not availed itself of this authority provided by Article 16 to borrow abroad. There may be some other reasons which we just do not understand. Perhaps one of the reasons is the fact that the Americans and Japanese did not join the bank, but in fact, it should not influence the bank's decision about borrowing. The decisions of these two countries were made on the basis that there was a feeling that the region did not require a second or a third development bank after the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and that a new bank was simply not needed. Moreover, if the Americans and Japanese joined the bank, it would mean that any bond issues in their markets would be fully guaranteed by the U.S. government, which apparently the U.S. government is not prepared to do, and the Japanese government as well is not prepared to do at this point. So aside from the American market in New York and the Tokyo market, there are markets in the member countries of the AIIB that are standing ready and would be sources for financing of the bank's future requirements for project funding. But they have, as I mentioned, they have not been set up and they are not operational at this moment. Another possible reason is that China wishes to keep very tight control of the AIIB. And of course, one way of doing this is by controlling the finances of the organization. But in any case, during more than a year of operation, it should have been possible for the bank to hire the professional staff it needs and to at least do one bond issue in one of the capitals of the member countries. The reason for this is something that needs to be explored, but there must be a rationale why the AIIB has not invoked the authority of Article 16 of its bylaws. Now, this is not only a departure for the bank, but it's a great departure from the procedures and policies and the practices of the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and the other regional banks. As a consequence, the AIIB will now have to find other ways, other opportunities, which will likely be more expensive to finance its projects in the future. One possibility would be the recycling of payments of principal and interest on maturing loans. But the fact is that the maturation period and the grace periods are so long that this is not a practical solution for this problem. A second possibility, which is more realistic, would be for the AIIB to call in the second and later installments of capital subscriptions that are payable in hard currencies. That would not sit well at all with the countries that are also members of the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, because in those institutions, the paid-in capital can only be used for startup operations, that is, for hiring staff, for renting a building, for providing for education for the staff, and so forth. It is not, paid-in capital is not to be used for project disbursements, as it seems to be in the case of the AIIB. In fact, in the World Bank, in the Asian Development Bank, the second and later disbursements installments, I should say, of callable capital are expected never to be called, and they are being held by member countries as a reserve against any future losses which they don't anticipate will occur. A third possibility would be the purchase of additional shares by the government of China, and the fourth possibility would be to negotiate the access to the New York and Tokyo markets. But these last two alternatives are not very realistic. So I think something has to be done about activating the Article 16 if the bank is genuinely to be a development institution with ongoing projects for its region. The second issue I want to raise has to do with the definition of Asian Development Bank countries, and particularly the AIIB countries that will be borrowing from that institution. According to a very recent Brookings Institution study, the rapid expansion of China's manufacturing industries has led during the past several years to a surplus in manufacturing capacity. And China wants to do something about it. What they're betting is that the developing countries of the world, the third world, will someday be developed into the markets for Chinese products, Chinese manufactured products in particular. So it's no coincidence, in the Brookings view anyway, that China is investing huge amounts of capital and is building special relationships with the third world countries with the expectation that they will become the markets for the future Japanese or Chinese exports. At about the same time in 2013, that China was pressing for a new Asian Development Bank, which we now call the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB, to finance Asian infrastructure. It launched a very ambitious new proposal to revive the ancient land and sea Silk Route from China to Northern Europe, which is now called China's One Belt, One Route, OBOR initiative. The route would link China with some 65 other countries across Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. This initiative is expensive. It would require more than $5 trillion of investments over a period of years. And in the words of Chinese President Xi Jinping, it would be the project of the century. China's OBR proposal is centered on investment in transportation and energy, but it therefore encompasses virtually everything the AIIB does: roads, bridges, gas pipelines, ports, railways, and power plants. This is both an opportunity and a red flag, because China's global OBR initiative and the AIIB involve many of the same countries and many of the same projects. But the OBOR proposal, that is the global revitalization of the Silk Route, was endorsed by only a few countries that are members of the AIIB, and only a few of them sent senior representatives to the summit meeting on the OBOR, which was held in May of 2017. Most countries have deferred taking a position on the major global Chinese initiative. India is, in fact, opposed to the plan to the extent that it involves Kashmir. The next meeting of the OBOR will take place in 2019, and China hopes that it will be represented that the countries will be represented at a more senior level. while there is an obvious overlap between the AIIB and the OBOR proposal, there are also significant differences between these two institutions. The OBOR is a global initiative that will require the participation of almost every country in the world. But the AIIB has a more limited perspective, which it is finding difficult, in fact, to implement even under present circumstances. The AIIB was established as a bank to finance infrastructure in the Asian Pacific region. References to Asia and to the region are scattered throughout the bank's documents, including its articles of agreement. The region is defined to include the geographic regions in composition classified as Asia and Oceania by the United Nations. Now, the preamble itself of the bank's articles posits that the region's investment needs, that is North Asia and the Pacific area's investment needs, are the reason for the bank's existence. The articles refer to the growth and social development of Asian Pacific countries as the raison d'etre of the bank itself. And there are significant references to this, to the investment needs and to the region. And for example, the preamble, the bylaws speak of a regional connectivity. They speak of improving regional integration for the people of Asia. And there is no similar language at all that's been agreed upon for the global OBOR initiative. As a consequence, it was therefore somewhat puzzling for the members of the AIIB to learn during the bank's second annual meeting that the AIIB supports the OBOR initiative. In fact, in a press interview, the bank president, Jin-Lee Quinn, cited just three requirements for AIIB support. First, the proposal must promote growth. Secondly, it must be socially acceptable. And third, it must be environmentally friendly. The Asian Pacific country designation, or the criteria that it be located within the region, seems to have been downgraded or lost in the process. This is a red flag for many of the shareholders, particularly since in the past year, the AIIB has financed with the World Bank $1.7 billion in loans, many of them outside the Asia-Pacific region, in, for example, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Oman, and Pakistan. Some of these are clearly outside the region, but it is a danger signal that they all lie within the Silk Road corridor that China is trying to develop. There was a similar situation, I believe, a few years ago involving China and a bank and a proposal for a Brazilian bank, but I'm not sure what has happened to that. It seems to have disappeared. It may, in fact, turn out that the bank has had to use the first installment of paid-in capital to finance some of China's OBOR initiative. Before the OBOR was really fully vetted by the country members of the bank itself. There is a larger risk, however, and that is that China's global initiative, the OBOR, which is the Silk Road renovation, which is fundamentally designed to really help the exporting industry and the capital investors of China, will see an advantage down the road in simply swallowing up the AIIB, in which case the lending activities of the AIIB would simply be folded into the OBOR complex. That may, in fact, be one of the reasons that members' capital subscriptions rather than market borrowing may be the source of funds for future AIIB loan disbursements. It may also help explain the absence of Asian country identification from some of AIIB's recent projects. As a result, I would warn that AIIB member countries should be aware of the fact that a hostile takeover of the AIIB by the OBOR could be part of the long-term planning for restoring the old Silk Route. I would like to conclude my remarks with that provocative idea that, in fact, the AIIB may someday disappear and be taken over. I hope it doesn't happen, but it's something that should be considered. And I would hope also, and I would urge that you consider the continuing need for a real non-political Northeast Asian Development Bank along the lines that has been discussed by this organization for the past several years. Thank you very much for your kind attention.